Stephen mentioned, so I'm Rob Walters. I'm the CTO at Engine Yard. And just a quick show of hands. Who knows who Engine Yard is? Okay, pretty good showing. A couple of questions before we get started. Who codes in Ruby? Node? PHP? Java? Okay, so we support all of those languages. Do you think we're missing anything at this point in time? Okay. Okay, no? Just want to check that out. So, given that most of you know who we are, maybe we're spending just like 1 minute though, just to point out that, platform as a service means a lot of things for a lot of people these days. But what it means to us is that we make the process of getting your application running in the cloud far easier, and then the management and monitoring of it after that fact far easier as well. So almost the sort of the canonical original PaaS definition, right? And it's sort of broadened out to a lot of different things since then. So what I'm going to be talking about is what I've sort of termed the development IT divide. And in the course of my career, I've worked on both sides of that divide and wanted to bring perhaps some of those experiences here and sort of talk about why there are these differences between the two groups and how I think we actually have a good chance to bring them closer together through, let's call it the medium of public cloud. I actually think there's a way that we can do this so that both groups get what they need through the use of public cloud. Okay, so start with just a few basic facts about the market. Not just to bore you with it, because I had some surprises when I did the research on this, so I'd be interested to see if you guys learn something as we go as well. So, cloud's this big market. Probably most of us focus on the cloud today. I mean, is most of what you guys do cloud-based? Okay. All right, so it's a $130 billion market today. It's going to be growing to $240 billion in 2017, and these are Gartner numbers. And the growth rates of the different pieces of the industry you see there. So IaaS growing the fastest at 40% a year, SaaS at 20, and PaaS at 25. So, I've been working in the cloud business for probably about the last 5 years. I haven't really thought a great deal about the rest of the industry, but I had a bit of a shock when I found out that only 3% of global IT spending is public cloud. This was okay. I realized I've been living in a bit of a cloud bubble till that point, And so what that means is, by the way, that global IT spending this year is a $4 trillion business, right? And in 2017, it'll be 4.5 trillion. And even in 2017, it's only 5% of global IT spending that's forecast to be public cloud. So this is kind of interesting to me. And it made me wonder whether some of the other assumptions I had about public cloud, one of them being the key one I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is who the right sort of owner and manager of it is inside an organization, might be something that I had an incorrect assumption about, let's call it. And we'll kind of explore a little bit of that as we go forward. So one of the things I wondered about was whether the business or development team is always going to be the logical owner of a public cloud service, right? So, I sort of gathered some conventional wisdom, at least, and let me run you through some of that. So generally, technologies get adopted in a couple of ways inside a business, and SMBs are always the first to adopt, right? They're smaller, they're agile, they don't have a bunch of inertia. Somebody sees something new, they like it, they start using it. If it works, they carry on. If they don't, they drop it like a stone, right, and move on. So SMBs are always the early adopters. We certainly saw that with cloud. Then you get enterprise departmental use come along, and so this is, some tech-savvy individual kind of takes something that he's seen and takes it into work because he gets to do a better job, right? So this is a well-intentioned individual making his life easier. Now, that happens, 20 or 50 times over, and a whole bunch of different people in the same company use a wide range of different cloud services or something. Then there's a big mess that enterprise IT has to come along and clean up, quite honestly. And so, you've seen that with PCs, you've seen it with bring your own device, sort of the iPad saga and things. So there's an argument that says that ultimately public cloud should wend its way to being managed and owned by the IT department. How many of you guys work in companies that are big enough to actually have an IT department? Okay, good. There's some relevancy here. Good. I gave this presentation on Monday and the answer was none, so I was a little disappointed. Okay, so that's point one. Point two is, in the last couple of years, we've certainly figured out that public cloud isn't the best or cheapest way to do everything, right? I mean, between 3 and 5 years ago, I would say most people, and especially a lot of analysts, were saying public cloud will be everything. It's this panacea. You want to dump all that stuff. You want to fire your IT people, and you want to consume public cloud services for everything. Now, we've moved through the hype cycle a little bit, and we're a little bit more aware of where public cloud is a good use case and where it's not so much. And so the focus seems to be right now a lot of activity and interest in hybrid environments, right? So, obviously hybrid being the way that you can connect something on-prem, such as a private cloud environment, with a public cloud environment. And now IT is going to own at least one end of that, right? So maybe why don't they own all of it? So, okay. I started to come around with this way of thinking and think, okay, maybe this is right. And I had just assumed that the fact that the business discovered public cloud, and developers were the sort of primary users, that was just the early stages, and this is the logical endpoint. Okay. Then I took a step back and I was like, well, hang on, there's a reason that developers kind of went around and outside of IT to do this. It wasn't because they were so happy and so in love with the internally delivered IT services, right? There was a problem. There was an unhappiness. There was an unmet need. And there was an alignment in public cloud with the incentives and values of a development team, right? It's all about time to market. It's about flexibility. There's a revenue orientation, right, which means that you just need to be more agile and flexible. Lower cost was certainly a part of it, especially a few years ago, but they were never the top of the list. Now, if you think about the things that an IT group has trouble with, flexibility, speed, this is tough for them. And so if you think about why that is, the first and foremost one has to be the breadth of everything they own. Right? Here's my stand up for the IT guy piece of the speech, right? It's like, these people are responsible for every hardware asset, piece of operating system, application, off-the-shelf stuff, commercially developed stuff, or custom stuff in the entire company that you've ever had. And you expect them to do a really good job on new development stuff with you, okay? So that, they've got a broad set of responsibilities. Now, here's the thing that I think is the real killer for them, and I've worked on this side of the fence, so I know what it's like. A cost center. Who loves working in a cost center? Who's ever done it? Whoever wants to go back to it, right? It's painful, right? Those of you that haven't, what it means to work in a cost center is, now's actually a good time of year to have this discussion. What do we got? October, November. Okay. How many people and how much budget do you need to last you through end of December in 2014? By the way, the business is planning at the same time as you. So you probably can't get a lot of information from him because he's doing his stuff too, right? The dev team's figuring out the roadmap. But you've got to put together a plan that's going to map to that and deliver against that now. And I'm going to hold you accountable for that Q3 and Q4 next year. Now, you may come through Q1 and Q2 quite well because, I've got a better idea about that. And so you've got some alignment there. But, that's a tough thing to deal with. Now, if you think about what that does to the measurement, how do you measure an IT department, right? It's going to be on things like how you met the budget, right? The performance and availability of all those systems we talked about, and also the, let's call it, internal customer satisfaction, all the users inside the company, how well they, report that their IT service has been working. And so I would suggest that that leads to an IT organization that is at the least kind of resistant, but at the worst, highly resistant to change. And if there's one thing that development organizations are all about, it's change, right? You're the agent of change in the environment, and you want to do new things all the time, and there's, often a better way than you thought there was a quarter ago. So, you've kind of got this fundamental mismatch in the alignment of incentives that we've got between these two groups. And you kind of wonder why there's been a problem, So, to use this sort of pendulum metaphor that I've got up on the screen, public cloud enabled a development team to kind of swing the pendulum over into this area of speed and flexibility they didn't have access to before, right? Now, on the other side, we've got kind of more structure and predictability, let's call it. That's sort of the traditional IT way of doing things. But the business guys love putting the foot on the gas and moving into the area of speed and flexibility. And so that's what we got with public cloud, and it was great. But it didn't solve the problem, right? It's sort of reinforced what I call the split brain problem, where if you sort of think about an entire organization, maybe there's like a metaphor for it in a single person, a single brain, right? It's a good idea that, all the different pieces of my brain work in like harmony, and there's a cohesive sort of plan to getting through my day and how I'd conduct a discussion and things. There's not this internal argument going on about how things should be addressed. Now, unfortunately, what we have, I think, is this sort of split brain deal where we've got a set of IT values perhaps in the left brain, and we've got a set of development values in the right brain. Now, they're kind of concentrated and they don't blend very well, you know, whereas realistically we want some kind of mix of all of them. So, you know, some things that resonate well to an IT shop is, you know, stability, structure, planning, budgeting, right? This is what they need to do to be effective in that cost center mentality. And development values, right? Time to market, flexibility, creativity, revenue orientation. So public cloud enabled the business to go do these things, but it didn't actually solve the underlying issue. And we've still got that left. So potentially, what your organization looks like today, you know, like it or not, you know, is this, right? You've got some kind of tug of war going on between these two groups. Now, it's less painful because you've avoided the interaction you had to have prior to public cloud, but essentially you're still wasting a lot of time and not maximizing the opportunity between the company inside the company. The reason I chose this particular screenshot is that the two teams in the tug of war are the US Navy and the US Army. So, two groups that should be on the same side, right? Which sounded like a good thing to me. So, if this is the problem that you still have inside an organization charged with, you know, developing new products plus maintaining them after release, what can we do about it, right? I mean, I don't mean how can we kind of band-aid it and patch it up and find a way around it and not deal with the problem anymore, but how can we find a root cause and actually do something serious about it? So I think there's a couple options that, you know, if I asked how we might do something about it, you guys might suggest. So I'm going to, you know, DevOps, maybe some of the lean startup stuff. And I think that these are all both useful, but perhaps miss the point of solving the fundamental underlying differences. So let me talk about DevOps first. DevOps, I think, is a great solution to part of the problem that we've described. I mean, you know, just think about the concept of taking an IT guy and a development guy and giving them the goal of, you know, building, delivering to market, maintaining, scaling a single application. This is great. I mean, it's pretty much what I talked about the problem being, except that most DevOps that I've seen, and I you know, love your feedback on this, seems to be being done as a sort of a grassroots, bottom-up type activity. So I'm not sure how you solve the sort of top-down incentive and, you know, mismatch in values in the organizations with it. Another issue is, maybe this is a good show of hands opportunity. Who thinks that DevOps is a like a philosophy, let's call it? Okay. Who thinks DevOps is a job? Okay. If it is a job, all of you can answer this. Who does it report to? Application development? Somewhere else in the business? Or IT? Okay. So, bit of a problem there, I would say, because it's a very non-prescriptive way to get things done. I think it can offer a lot of help and be really useful, but it reminds me in a sense of how I think about agile development, right? You know, two guys are yammering away and talking about how they both work in these agile shops and it's awesome and how it's brought them all these benefits, and it turns out that they're doing entirely different things, right? It's all agile, but it's not perhaps prescriptive enough to go after the same problem. You know, I mean, paired programming is a great agile technique, but it perhaps doesn't solve a problem that you have between your development team not talking to your product team, right? Yet you could be mistaken for thinking that this agile shop guy that you've been talking to, that's all covered. I find a little bit of that with DevOps. So, you know, I don't want to knock it, but I think that it might miss that, you know, top level problem. Lean startup stuff as well, I think is I actually really like that. I mean, when I read that book, I was so excited. I was on vacation. I just couldn't stop reading it. I thought this is awesome because it's so customer focused and it's so business centric. And I think it has the possibility to unite an entire business behind its philosophy. But what I've seen from implementations, and again, I'd love to know what you've seen as a match to this, is it tends to come from sort of mid-level management on down. So again, a lot of good intentions, but you've got to think that the scope of the effective change that somebody can have is a little bit more limited than the potential of it. So a third possibility, and this is something I only learned about literally last Thursday. I went to a Forrester event in Indianapolis, the Application Development and Delivery Professionals Forum or something. And so one of their research VPs was talking about something they're calling business technology, BT. And so BT is essentially folding in some business insight and understanding into an existing IT department to make sure that they serve the business's needs better, which sounds great and something like should have been happening forever. But, you know, it's apparently a new thing and it's something that IT people should be doing. So there's a lot of options in terms of what you could do. What I worry about is that if you don't align incentives at the top of any of these organizations, right, and you make sure that the IT guys and the development teams, almost like the DevOps example of a project, take it right to the top and say, you know, this product line needs to go through these phases in this next year, and all of you share that single goal, right? Everybody good on that, and we'll reward and incent you all on the same way, you know, not sort of IT guy, well, you hit your budget for the year, but in doing so, you screwed up the product team. So, you know, you can see how these misaligned incentives are problematic in organizations. Now, the only way to get aligned incentives at the top of an organization is the right level of executive sponsorship. You know, the guys running the company have to sponsor this. And like it or not, that takes time. So as an example of that, I remember hearing a story about a CEO of now this is of a global company, so we can shrink the timescale down for most of the places we work. But obviously as the CEO of a global company, he sponsors every initiative, he's constantly kicking things off, and travels all the time as well. And so he developed this rule of thumb that was the following. The first time that somebody, when he goes to visit a remote site, tells him about an initiative that's going on is the first time he believes it's actually real and it's hit like the ground level, if you like. So, you know, he's in his office in New York and they kick off something with his management team. When he hears about that same initiative in, you know, from the office in Brazil, that's how he knows it's actually permeated all the way down and it's hit, you know, ground level and it'll become something real, okay? The problem is, it was taking on average 18 months for that to happen. Now, okay, it's a global company, but you get my point, right? It takes a long time for something to go from the top to the bottom of a company, and even then, that's the first time someone was talking about an initiative. Changing behavior takes a lot longer. You know, it's like, hey boss, there's a great thing we're working on, we think it's gonna be great and interesting and fun, is a lot different to, we've been doing this thing for 2 years, we went off track a few times, but we've really nailed it now, and we've got these tangible benefits delivered. Okay, so this stuff takes a long time. So, what does all of that mean for the issue at hand? So, one possible outcome of this in the year 2014, right? So maybe a little recap is in order. So, we've said that, you know, we've got this split brain issue in a lot of organizations between development and IT. There are plenty of tools around to help you fix it, but they're going to take a long time to actually have benefit. Yet, because of pressure most likely from the CFO and the CIO, IT is going to have a lot of demand to start providing cloud services in the next year. Does that sound like reality to any of you guys? Okay, and can you see where the potential problem is? Okay, so what could happen is that because of, you know, the difference in control that we have here, and possibly we haven't sort of united our development and IT groups yet, that the pendulum is going to swing back to this sort of structure and predictability side of the equation, which it won't be all bad. I mean, the CFO and the CIO are going to get what they have asked for. I mean, because, you know, what gets measured gets managed, right? It's like, I see far too much public cloud spending coming in on personal credit cards. It all adds up underneath the CMO eventually, and we've got to put that somewhere where it's more predictable. Okay, that will happen. So there's goodness in it for the company, but who's interested in losing development flexibility as part of that? No one, right? So we don't want this pendulum shift to the other side. I mean, even for the benefits of cost control, increased security, potentially if you went with a different vendor, by the way, consolidation of spend, or, you know, good vendor management. I mean, these are all good hygiene things, but I wouldn't swap them for the flexibility that public cloud gave my dev team. Not in a million years, right? So that's kind of the worst case scenario. You know, that could happen. Now, I was all set as of Saturday evening when I was having a bath to tell you that what we needed was equilibrium in this pendulum. And I suddenly realized that that wasn't what we needed at all, because I realized that I've been treating it like sort of a continuum, right? That on the one hand, you had all the speed and flexibility you wanted as a developer, and on the other hand, you had a lot of structure and predictability. And I realized that that we can't look at that as a continuum. What we have to look at that as, effectively like orthogonal, dimensions to each other. So let me tell you a story that made me realize that. How many of you work in companies or have worked in companies in the past that have external customer-facing support organizations? Guys answering the phone, okay. How many of you have seen that organization be asked to increase the rate of ticket closing? Okay, doesn't seem an unreasonable request, right? Just be more efficient, we can cut down on the, the overtime bill, things like that. Well, how many of you have seen during the course of that activity, which is generally a successful one, by the way, it's not hard to do, customer satisfaction with the company or service go down? Okay, right? See where I'm going with this? These things don't have to be orthogonal, right? I mean, in that case, sorry, they should be. In that case, the request to the team should have been, to investigate ways where you could increase ticket close rates while maintaining or increasing customer satisfaction levels, right? Customer satisfaction is the thing that you cannot trade off for an enhanced ticket close rate. But I am interested in ticket close rates going up. So if you can hold this constant or improve it, knock yourself out on this one, right? And the same, I'm going to suggest is true here. What we need to have is, rather than this, this continuum, which I finally realized was not how I should have displayed this, is more like this, right? It's not about equilibrium. It's about both. And I think you can have both, and we need to ask for both, because it's actually in the interests of both the business guys, and the development teams, and IT that we have both. Because at the end of the day, the flexibility that public cloud gives you is what's giving you some type of business advantage today. So nobody in the organization wants to trade that away for structure, right? So right now, we have this mode where we're kind of, high on speed and flexibility, but kind of low in the IT area, structure and predictability. What we need to do is just kind of move that across. So not trade anything off, but figure out how to do that. Now that may be something we haven't done as a group, inside a company before, but I think that's the challenge we have ahead of us. So what does that look like, right? It needs to be thought about, it's a common set of processes and tools that understand and empower both groups. You need to be able to look at the incentives and goals for each group and make both of them achievable with this new structure. So, developers need to be free to innovate, unhindered by too much process and planning. Yet IT still needs to be able to set and enforce standards and policies, right? So a couple of examples. I mean, the first one is an obvious one. I mean, you could just transfer ownership of existing public cloud accounts to the IT team, right? You don't trade any flexibility. You keep using the same tools that you have. You just make someone else do the vendor management and track the SLAs and put together your 47 different accounts into one and drive a better unit price, right? I mean, that's definitely an option. So another one, if you do need to find a different tool, is to find one that understands both groups. So the one thing I'll tell you about, Engine Yard as a sort of to avoid being a product pitch, is that we're certainly working on a couple of pieces of the product that will help you do that. So one of them is called a blueprint. Now, a blueprint is more than just a description of a single operating system and a stack on top of it. It encompasses an entire environment, and it enables someone, in this case it would be an IT person, to set all the standards you would want in perhaps a production Ruby environment. Okay, it may have, these load balancers running these versions of this product, may have a certain app server, may have a certain operating system version, mapping to all the standards in your organization. So this can all be worked on in an offline fashion, stored, and then published out to individual developers, project teams, et cetera, et cetera. Role-based access takes care of all of that stuff. So then, when you are developing and it's time to stand up a test environment or time to, go live, the workflow is just you're presented with only approved blueprints. So you pick one, you move on. So that's one way where both groups can get what they need. So I'm running a little ahead of time, but this is actually my last slide. So I think we're at a sort of a point where whenever you began your public cloud journey, I think we're at a similar point now, which is to say, it's time to kind of lead the way into the next phase, right? You went and did it with public cloud, you went and found it, probably no one even asked you to, but you went and you did it, right? And you got involved and you started using these products and life got a little bit better. So my suggestion is that it's time to sort of do it for the second time, but this time to encompass a slightly broader range of requirements, right? So figure out what some good business requirements, and some good IT focused requirements to go with your development ones are. And now do this with, a partner from that side of the business, right? If you do this on your own, one, you're probably going to get it wrong. But secondly, just the sort of credibility you can build, plus relationships potentially as well, by doing that are much stronger. I mean, ultimately, if you can present a recommendation to either keep using the same product that meets everybody's needs or move to a different one that, both sides of this sort of equation are happy with, you're going to be in a much stronger position than, well, I did this work and this research on my own, and I didn't really consider anybody else's problem. So on the do side, do start doing something, right? And do something with, with a buddy from IT or a DevOps guy or someone that gets it, so that they don't think that you have to lose flexibility, right? But then don't just sit there quietly and think that no one's noticed you're using all this public cloud, right? If you think that's the case, someone's not doing their job in your finance department, for one, right? And I hope that's not the case either. So someone's noticing all the spend, and they're totaling it up, and they're either getting around to doing something about it, or it's on the list for 2014 to have something done about it, right? It's a nice thought to sort of just go back to your desk and put your head down and carry on and hope that no one's noticed, but they have. These numbers are too large. One of the things right back at the beginning of the presentation when I was talking about the size of public cloud spending being 3 to 5% of global IT spending, I wondered if that was perhaps the equivalent of what it might be in a single organization. So you think if you're the CFO and the IT team comes to you and perhaps there's a $100 million budget for a year, ludicrously large number, I know, but 3 to 5 million comes in at the end of the year as unplanned and unbudgeted. That's big enough to do something about, right? I mean, when it was a couple of 100,000, okay, but this is sort of beyond our tolerances. The CFO needs to do a better job than be within 3 to 5% and growing. So I think that there will be a focus on what needs to be done in this area. And then finally, I'll finish up with, don't underestimate your power inside your organizations. I mean, firstly, development teams are where, new stuff happens, right? I mean, between a product team and a development team, I see that as the agent of change in any organization. So you're already thought of in that way, and it's expected in a sense that new ideas come out of these groups. And if you can do that, in conjunction with somebody from the IT group, I would say that you will be in a position where you can take much more control of, the next 12, 24 months of what will happen from the toolset perspective that you'll be provided with. So hopefully that's been interesting. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer. So I think that's obviously a key issue. I think it depends what level of the stack perhaps you're looking for. I mean, there are several vendors who sort of span other vendors, right? So you can, someone like a RightScale will sort of help you not get locked into, IaaS provider A, but then potentially you end up being locked into RightScale perhaps. So you've got to kind of look at that. Plenty of platform vendors will say there's no lock-in. There's no perhaps proprietary extension that you write into your code, but then you've got to look at what APIs and CLIs they give you. So I mean, it might not be lock-in, but it's investment. So I think just keeping your eyes, the fact that you're asking, I think, is the big thing, right? I mean, when you evaluate products, you've got to ask all these questions, and I think there are plenty of options that allow you to minimize it. But if you start taking the definition of lock-in just being investing and learning and building a skill set around a particular product, it's almost impossible. So I think you just have to make the trade-off. I mean, on the other hand, there are many reasons for proprietary extensions to be written. It's generally for a benefit. Now, if you want that benefit, maybe you're okay with it. So, other questions?
Does engineering go after the average developer and try to go that way, or go after enterprise, or can you do both?
Both. I mean, certainly our history has been with sort of more dynamic, smaller environments. I mean, we started out with Ruby as our primary language. But one of the big strengths of the product is that it's very applicable to a sort of a DevOps user, which tends to be found in a, in a medium to larger size environment. There's sort of full control of the entire stack as opposed to some of the the lack of transparency you'll see in some other products. So we definitely understand there's sort of a full developer use case and a parallel one for DevOps and IT people. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the management of your public cloud, whichever you use, I am the IT department of
Uh-huh.
my as well.
I hope I represented you well. I didn't
Oh, you nailed
diss
it.
you too bad.
So, as far as the management of that public cloud, standing up new instances and managing, virtual private clouds and networking interfaces and what have you, how involved do you think the development team needs to be in that management?
I think that's a great question. Sure. So, can I summarize it? How much input do we think that the development team should have in, if I can summarize that part, into sort of underlying network level type stuff, infrastructure type decision making? Is that roughly it? Okay. Well, I think it depends if you've got other people that can help. I mean, in a small organization, I think the developer has to do that stuff because there isn't anybody else. And I think that you put criteria like that into your evaluation materials to see if, you can actually get either abstractions to take care of that, or perhaps there are professional services or, abstract layers within a product or cloud service that can help you with it. Now, I think if you've got, a DevOps or an IT person on hand that can help, I think you look for, the best practices that they know about, and then when you're evaluating these products, you find one that matches the sort of control versus automation trade-off that's often made in these things. There's like a philosophical difference between a lot of, IaaS and PaaS providers in the way that they'll expose things to you. It's like you can have this much control, and then someone else is like, no, you should have this much control. Well, you need to find the one where you like that amount of control, and it's not a pain to have to do that. You don't want to be sort of handcuffed and you can't do things. So I think there's no answer apart from the answer that you have. The amount you want is the right answer, I guess.
Another question comes to my mind is that, besides many others which I may ask later, is that when we say DevOps, we're trying to teach operations how to be developers and write code and be like consume cloud and programmable infrastructure and so forth. And we're trying to teach developers how to take into consideration the scaling of the application and what my infrastructure is doing. So being aware of the infrastructure and including it into the application. Maybe we've been kind of backwards. But which one should we focus on first as a bigger enterprise? Should we start telling our operations that learn how to write code first, or developers how to be more on the operations side? So
I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. I think that at least on the operations side, if you've got people that are already happy with some level of scripting technology as opposed to real development, I think that there's a closer link between the sort of DevOps tool sets and scripting than full-on development. So assessing your current sysadmin guys may be an important starting point. I mean, my experience would say that if you've got some pretty good Linux guys, maybe some Unix background type guys. I mean, back in the days when I started, if you said you were a Unix system administrator, you knew Perl, you could shell script, and you could write C. You couldn't say it otherwise. You were a sysadmin of some sort, but you weren't a real, you hadn't finished your training and development. So I think you've got to look at where the teams are. Now, on the Windows side, you tend to have less, strength in those scripting areas. So, assessing the bench of what you have, maybe the good, the first point.
just an observation I want to share, and I want to get your take on this. I think many of the enterprises are not jumping into consumption of cloud at IT level,
Mm-hmm.
central level, because they think it's not ready yet. For example, OpenStack is not ready yet, or AWS is not, like we suppose you can build anything with it. So like it's like not controllable. Um, uh, one thing I usually tell, a couple of things I usually tell these type of CIOs is that if you don't do it, there might be a brain drain from your organization, because if other people are doing it, your peers are doing it in your industry, right, in your vertical, all these people who are techies, they want to be on the cutting edge. All techies, that I think, will agree to that. They want to do the latest and greatest stuff, right? So they might leave your shop and go there who's doing it, number one. Number two is, if you, everybody agrees it's a journey. It's not like one switch on and off thing, right? So it will take a while to get there, right? So if you are worried about a hurdle at mile 50, and you're not starting, that's a big no-no. You should start. By the time you get there, these things you're worried about, these hurdles will be removed. So by the time your organization gets, cloud consumption, because there's a lot of people, processes, training needs to happen.
Mhm.
It's like 70% people, processes, and 30% technology. We all agree with that, right? So that's how I say it. Is there any better way to convince them to move?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think if there's not an internal drive to do something, I mean, it's a little bit, as I said before, with the shared alignment and values. I mean, if something doesn't come from the top and someone decides it's time to start, there'll be people who are excited about doing cloud stuff, and there'll be people using public stuff. But, one of the things that may convince them that the time is right is there have been 3, if not 4, that I can think of, sort of enterprise-focused cloud launches in the past 3 to 4 months. So, incumbent IT vendors who, if I'm the IT group, I have a strong relationship with, I'm more likely to trust a product coming from, a guy I already spent a lot of money with. When they say it's ready, maybe it is. Now, that may not be right, but what it might do is kick off the activity inside the organization. Maybe now that there's a public cloud from vendor X, we should look at this. But if we do a good job and actually gather our requirements, and they are just one of 3 or 4 in a bake-off, maybe we don't end up with them, but they've also enabled us to get over that hump of, well, surely it's, enterprise cloud. Look, it's even got a name. It's called enterprise cloud. It's ready. We should start doing it. And that is time. Thank you.